Many students suffer from test anxiety, not only for math classes, but for other types of classes as well. We're going to talk about test anxiety, and we're going to talk about specifically in relation to math test anxiety. But a lot of the ideas we have here you may find useful in other courses as well. Everyone is going to have some level of anxiety when they're going to take a test, right? For some people, it's a motivational factor. It just makes them a little nervous, more so than necessarily anxious to the point where it's causing problems. So it makes sure that they study and they prepare because they're a little worried about it. But that worry isn't overtaking them and leading to a point where they're afraid of it and they're beginning to avoid it. That's what we want to talk about, is when it becomes a demotivational factor, something that we're so anxious and worried about a test that we procrastinate, we don't study well. This can even affect our ability to retain things in our long-term memory. So we're going to talk about anxiety and hopefully some ways to combat it, some myths about it, etc. along the way, and try to give you some tools that if you are someone who suffers from test anxiety, hopefully we can reduce it. You can't make it go away. Everybody has it to some level. But if we can, try to move it from where it's a demotivational factor to where it's more motivational in terms of your approach to tests. So math test anxiety is one of three different math-related anxieties. There's math test anxiety, there's numerical anxiety, and there's abstraction anxiety. All right, we're going to talk about math test anxiety, but numerical anxiety is an extreme emotional or physical reaction to working with numbers and doing arithmetic. Abstraction anxiety is a reaction to variables and equations. As I've said, our focus is going to be on test anxiety. But if you feel you're suffering from numerical anxiety or abstraction anxiety, you can talk to me, let me know, and I can try to share some information with you. Or you can also search for information on the internet. There's lots of stuff out there on anxieties and ways to deal with them. So we want to change your response. We want to move from anxiety being a demotivational factor to a motivational factor. And the good and bad news is that these anxieties are learned responses. The bad news is that we learn them from bad experiences with math, from the bad attitude that our society tends to have toward math. Or on the other hand, the good news is that learned responses are things that we can change. So you're not stuck with your math anxiety and your math test anxiety. It's something that we can work on and reduce. So that's ultimately what we're going to talk about, is ways for you to change your response to math testing situations. First thing you have to do is admit you have a problem. All right, sounds like those 12-step programs. And for a reason. Those programs actually tend to be pretty good programs. They've helped a lot of people out over time. But test anxiety isn't necessarily just math test anxiety. Sometimes it's we're more anxious about math tests than others. Some students are more anxious about math tests than others. It's important ultimately to recognize that you have it, how it affects you, and develop a plan to deal with it. If it's motivational, you may not really need to develop much of a plan. But if it's demotivational, that's where we need to work on things. So Paul Nolting is a writer who's written quite a bit about math study skills. And in a book he released in 2005, he notes some causes of test anxiety. Test anxiety can be a learned behavior resulting from lots of different things: expectations of parents, teachers, significant others. It can be caused by an association between grades and our own personal worth or value. It can develop from a fear of alienating parents, family, or friends because of poor grades. It can stem from a feeling of lack of control and an inability to change one's life situation. It can be caused by students being embarrassed by a teacher at some point or by other students because they weren't able to do a math problem well. It can be caused by timed tests, the fear of not finishing a test. Even when one is fully capable of doing all the problems, it may just be the time factor that causes the anxiety. And it can be caused by being put in math courses above one's level of competence. If you're jumped ahead or moved along too quickly, that's really what we're talking about here, then you've missed something and you don't have a good foundation upon which to build new math. Test anxiety manifests itself in different ways for different people. Some people just really start to worry. Some people actually feel nauseous. Physical sweaty palms is a manifestation. Stiff or tense muscles, beginning to breathe rapidly, feeling the heartbeat speed up. Skipping class because of these types of things, or skipping a test because of these things. Putting off math classes until the end of a degree program because you're just so worried about taking math in general. Math anxiety can cause procrastination, as we saw in the previous slide. It can create mental blocks. It can stop us from accessing our long-term memory. It can even stop us from getting information into our long-term memory. And it can slow down our mental processes. If we're feeling nauseous, if we're beginning to have our heartbeat get rapid, we're breathing rapid, that affects the way our brain works. One of the worst things about anxiety is that anxiety tends to feed on itself. All right. Once we start to procrastinate, once we start to see these mental blocks, it makes our anxiety even worse than it was before, and we kind of get into a spiral. And that's what can lead to things like just not even attending class, leaving our math classes until the very end of a program. Anxiety sometimes causes us to rush through a test and fail to check our answers because we just want to get out of the classroom as fast as we possibly can. And that generally is not a successful way to take a test. Math test anxiety can occur throughout the course at lots of different periods, not just at test times. And therefore it can affect all aspects of the course. Again, it's important to recognize its symptoms, try to figure out what's causing it, and then we can work on trying to reduce it. So reducing it takes work and practice, but it can be done. Creating mock test situations where you can practice the techniques that we're going to give you shortly is a really good idea. The more tests that you take, the more opportunities you have to analyze your anxiety, what's causing it, how does it manifest, develop approaches to neutralize it, which we'll talk about in a moment, and then practice and refine your approach. Get better at both of those first two items there, analyzing and developing an approach. So how do we reduce our test anxiety? Acknowledging it, being aware of it, helps a lot. Doing math every day so it becomes a regular part of your routine also helps a lot. Don't procrastinate. Don't leave the math until the last minute. Don't try to study in big blocks of time, but try to do a little bit all the time. It's almost like it desensitizes you to the anxiety. Study smart by improving your note-taking, textbook reading, homework, effective studying skills, your use of memory. Once you start working on those study skills, it can make math seem easier. If math starts to seem easier, your anxiety starts to go away. Always attend class, regardless of whether you want to or not. Take notes. Be exposed to the math visually and orally, that is through your eyes and through your ears. Interact with your instructor and your fellow students. Hear important announcements. All those sensory inputs help to learn the material and can make us more comfortable with it. And as I've mentioned a few times already, practice test taking as much as possible so that you can practice coping with your anxiety in that testing type situation. You can talk to your instructor about test anxiety. You can talk to the folks in the math lab, fellow students, friends, family. If they have it, how have they dealt with it? Remember to not worry about anybody but yourself. Do your best and always take pride in what you do. No matter what your result is, find something positive in it. Maybe you didn't get the grade you wanted to on the test. But did you learn something? Do you know more now than when you started learning that material? That's a positive. And we often forget to look at that. Try to get a good night's sleep before a test. Try to avoid caffeine and other stimulants that often increase anxiety. This isn't true for everybody, but it is true for most. If you're feeling physically tense during a test, stretch. Don't be afraid to take 10 to 15 minutes before a test and just focus on stretching and relaxing. Do a little stretch in the middle of a test. All right. You can take short breaks during a test. I'm not talking about getting up and walking around, but just stop working on the test for a minute or two. Try to relax. Try to control your breathing. Try to stretch a little bit. All right. Get yourself relaxed. Get your focus back if you felt it going, and then get back into the test. You can close your eyes and visualize a relaxing scene. Sometimes that helps if we're feeling anxious in pretty much any situation. As I've already said, taking slow, deep breaths during a test, but doing it before and after a test also can help in reducing anxiety. You want to try to manage any negative self-talk that you do. Don't say things like, I can't do math, I'm going to fail this test, I can't remember math, college isn't for me, whatever. Don't be negative, be positive. So recognize when you're doing negative self-talk, stop it, and then if possible, see if you can turn it around and turn it into some positive talk instead. It's amazing how good human beings are at talking themselves into failure. Examples of things you can say: I can do math, I will pass this test, I can remember math when I'm relaxed, I'm here, so college must be for me. Finally, here are 12 facts from Paul Nolting again. Students are not born with test anxiety. Test anxiety is not a mental illness, it's a learned response or behavior. Test anxiety can be reduced. Some level of test anxiety is okay, everybody has it. Some students who don't prepare don't have test anxiety. False. All right. Some students who don't prepare have massive amounts of test anxiety. Students with test anxiety can learn math. That is absolutely true. Students who are well prepared may have test anxiety. Just because someone does well on tests doesn't mean they're not struggling with test anxiety. They may have found ways to conquer it. Very intelligent students and students lacking high-level courses such as calculus still often have test anxiety. Again, they've just learned to deal with it. Attending class and doing homework will not reduce all test anxiety, but it can help. Being told to relax during a test will not automatically make you relaxed. You have to do things that help you relax. Breathing, stretching, visualizing. Doing nothing about test anxiety will not make it go away. If anything, doing nothing can make it worse. And finally, reducing test anxiety doesn't guarantee that your grades will improve, but it shouldn't make them worse, and it should increase the probability that they do improve.